Fred, it's okay, we can start? Okay. Thank you for joining this second session for the CNCF meetup in Sofia. Hello. Just for me to know, who was the first time here? Or 1, 2, 3, 4? Okay. Thank you. So, like last time, we have some people joining on the WebEx, mainly our colleagues from Boston. So, hello, guys. This meetup is we're going to have two presentations today. Again, presentation, I would say. The goal of the meetup is to discuss many things around Kubernetes and open source in the CNCF community. If you want to debate on topic without presentation or doing some hands-on workshop, do not hesitate to contact us and we will arrange the room and do the meetup to work. The format here is presentation again, but this is not a mandate. If you want to talk, feel free to propose something. So today, two presentations. The first one by Cedric about how to extend Kubernetes, and the second one is about pod anomaly detection and system stability. This second presentation, you will see that the look and feel is for KubeCon, so it's a kind of preview of what we will run in 1 week, in 2 weeks in Copenhagen. So every feedback is welcome. So now let's start.
Okay. Let's start by two questions. So who is already running application on Kubernetes in production? Okay. And who already wanted to change the behavior of Kubernetes, the default one? Yeah, like everyone, I think. So today's this presentation, it will not cover all the features of Kubernetes. If you look this atlas, you can see that Kubernetes when we talk about Kubernetes, we can talk about a lot of things. And today I will cover just scratch the surface of 4 different topics. So API, internal architecture, scheduling, and the lifecycle of your apps inside Kubernetes. And so the objective of this presentation is first, I will cover the basic architecture of Kubernetes, so how it works. So this is like, if some people don't know a bit Kubernetes, maybe it will help to understand the rest of the presentation. Then present 4 different options of how you can extend the Kubernetes behavior thanks to a feature that is directly provided by Kubernetes, some interface and so. And then and for each option, I will propose some idea of how to use it. So first, architecture. So this is a representation of a Kubernetes cluster, simple representation. So here you can see that you have 2 kinds of nodes. So you have master nodes. So you can have only 1 master node, but usually to have a HA cluster, you will run 4 different masters that is synced together. And then you have the compute node. And here for compute node, you can have as many compute nodes that you want, depending on the size of the workload that you want to run. The current limitation, I think, is still 5,000 compute nodes with the good performances of your cluster. So as you can see, most of the process of Kubernetes is running inside the master. So you have the controller, the API server, the scheduler. And then you have another process that is running in each compute node that we call the kubelet. And this kubelet is interacting with the operating system and the runtime process that usually it's Docker. So, and as you can see in this representation, every communication is communicating through the API server. And this is a key design of Kubernetes in order to have something that is scalable and have good performances. So I say that usually we use Docker, but since the first version of Kubernetes, things evolved, and some people want to run a container on other container runtime than Docker. So the community, maybe pushed by Kubernetes, defined some interface. So the first one was open container interface. This is the way that the container runtime is communicating with the operating system, or the operating system communicates with the runtime. Then you have the container runtime interface. Here, it's used by Kubernetes for the communication for the kubelet with the container runtime. And also, we have now the container network interface. And like this, you can plug the network that you want behind the implementation of Kubernetes with the kubelet or the runtime, container runtime. We can so CoreOS propose, what's the name, Rocket as container runtime, but also now you have Red Hat that is pushing for CRI-O. It's another implementation of the container runtime. So already you have different options for the container runtime in your Kubernetes cluster. And what I want really to understand here is that everything that you are doing in the Kubernetes cluster is going through the API server. So the API server is like the event bus of your cluster. After, what you are using to communicate between between process in Kubernetes is called resources. And this is the representation of one resources, and all the resources is looking like this. First thing that you have the definition. A definition is a kind, so here it's pod and the version. You can have for the same kind several versions of your resources. Then you have the metadata where you can find the name and also the namespace. So I will not go into detailed namespace now, but this is something that the name should be unique by namespace. And then you can have labels, and these labels, it's like a map of key value, and you can have as many as you want, and it's used after to search resources through the labels. And last part is the spec. So the spec is where you define the specificity of your resources. Here it's a pod, and you can define here what is inside your pod, so what is the workload of your application. You can see that you have a list of containers. Here it's nginx container. You have also the volume, and you can configure where you want to mount the volume. So it's like, thanks to that, you can, several containers can share the same volume, the same IP. This is pods is really the unit of deployment in Kubernetes. You have services, you have other resources. For example, the compute node is represented by a node resource. So everything goes through resources inside Kubernetes, is represented by your resources. And so when you want to, for example, to load your application inside a pod, you interact with the API server. The API server store these resources inside his storage. That is Kubernetes is using etcd. Then the scheduler will detect that a new pod is created without any node with no node configure. So he will choose one node between the two available here. Here he selects the node 2. He will set it inside the object, store again in etcd. Then the kubelet will detect that a new node was attached to him. He will interact with Docker, with the OS, to configure properly the pod, and your application is running properly inside the node 2, and you can use it. So it looks simple like this, and most of the people are using Kubernetes didn't know exactly how it works like this. So I think if someone asks you, do you know how Kubernetes is working? So you can answer yes, and you can maybe put expert on your CV about Kubernetes now. So the question is why you want to extend Kubernetes. It looks simple, it looks extendable, or it should work with any payload. But in fact, it's not always the case. So it works well for stateless applications that don't have any information to store in. Most of the 12-factor applications work well in Kubernetes with the basic feature. But when you want to operate databases, or you want replication between clusters, some feature is missing in Kubernetes. So you want to extend the initial behavior of Kubernetes. This is the first thing, so extend a platform. Then you want to improve operation of your Kubernetes cluster. So for example, failover or rollback is not something that is very easy to do. And when you want to do specific operation, when you do a failover, you need maybe to improve a bit the pipeline of operation in this case. So you need maybe also to add some extra feature in Kubernetes. Something that you should not do, and it's to try to extend Kubernetes to implement some feature in your application. Your application should be able to run in Kubernetes, but also outside Kubernetes. So if you want an interface between your application and Kubernetes, you can put some sidecar container inside your pods to do the conversion with the Kubernetes environment, but you should not put directly inside your application. So people interested of extending Kubernetes should be people that managing the platform. So SRE team, DevOps team, middleware teams that provide some services, base services for application, but not directly the application. The application should be able just to define the pods where the application is running. So the first use case that we will see tonight is so everyone can create resources in your cluster, but you want to validate the resources when they are created for security reasons, maybe, or maybe for other, to be sure that people are doing the things in the right way. So an example is that you want security in your cluster, and you want that the Docker image that is running on your cluster only depends on your private registry. You don't want to rely on the Docker hub, and so you can, thanks to the external admission control, check the source of the container image before that it is created in your cluster, and refuse the creation of these resources if it depends on external resource. So how it works? So this is a representation of the API server. And in fact, when you create a resources or you want to update the resources inside Kubernetes, you go through a pipeline. The first thing is the authentication. So each user is authenticated thanks to a token that you can find in your kube.config file. Then you have the authorization, and this is rely on airbag feature of Kubernetes. And then you still have other steps to follow before be able to store your object inside etcd. So for example, you can have resource quota to validate that you have enough resources for the creation of your resource. Then you can check that the service account that you have inside your pod template is existing in your cluster. And you have like this a lot of other stuff that is checked. In OpenShift, that is the Red Hat version of Kubernetes, I think you have more than 20 admission control like this. So before, when you want to add a new admission control, you're on. What you need to do is to check out the code of Kubernetes, add your admission control inside, recompile it, and run your specific version of API server. So this is possible when you run your own cluster, but when you want to run in GCE with GKS on Azure and so, you are not allowed to modify the structure or the infrastructure of your Kubernetes cluster. So it wasn't possible. So since the version of 1.7 of Kubernetes, it wasn't possible, but this feature, external admission webhooks, was added in 1.7. And what is providing to configure and to register some webhook inside the admission control pipeline through the API server. And each webhook will be able to allow or deny an incoming request. You can specify on which kind of resources and operation you want to rely. So in my example, when a pod is created inside or a pod tries to be created inside my Kubernetes cluster, I will call my webhook, or on all the operation on the services. And your webhook, what it will need to reply, it's just allow or denied. So this is the representation of the request and the response. I put it in YAML, but in fact you receive it in JSON. You can see that you have the kind of object that is initialized in the request, in which namespace you have the user info. Here, in my example, Bob. And then you have the object information, so the name and the object. What I can see here in this request is that someone, Bob, is trying to do an exec inside my pod name admission webbook demo, and on the container admission webbook demo also, with the command sh. So for security reason, my webbook is checking that we don't try to log in or to access a container, because maybe you have a credit card inside, and so you don't want that people try to get some credit card. So what are the response of my admission webbook is allow false, and then you can be nice with your user and explain why you don't are allowed to do it. So quite simple. The good things about this is webbook, so you can implement your webbook in any language that you want. You don't need to do in Golang like all the code from Kubernetes is done. It's simple to do in Go, but you can do what you want. So that's it for admission control. Of course, you can put as many webbooks that you want. Be careful that it's done synchronously in the admission pipeline, so your webbook should answer quite fast, and it should be reliable also. Else, all the performances of your cluster will be decreased due to that. Sorry. The second use case is you want to decorate your resources automatically. One use case possible is that you use Prometheus as monitoring system, and you want to add automatically annotation for Prometheus on your pods in order to be scrapped automatically when it's created. So for that, now you have initializer. So admission control is it's a read-only way to interact with resources when it's created. Initializer, you are able to update the resources before it is used by the cluster to create pods. And this is how it works. So your initializer, it's a process. You can run as an application inside your cluster. It's represented here in Node 2. And the initializer, when it starts, it should register himself to the API server. For registration, you need to create a resources representing the registration. It's an initializer configuration. You provide a name for your initializer, and you define on which object you want, on each resource you want to be called in the flow of the creation. So here, deployment in any resource, any API groups. Then your initializer, what it's doing is watching all the objects corresponding to deployment that is not initialized yet. It will retrieve the resource when when the resource is created, add the stuff inside the resources, and send the update to the API server. If we look at the flow, lot of message exchange, but it's quite simple. So initialization, registration, and watch the object that is not initialized. The deployment control is doing the same. The client creates the deployment. So simple deployment. Automatically, the API server, thanks to the registration of the initializer, will add in the pending list of initializer your initializer, Prometheus init, here. The initializer gets this definition, will add what he wants to do, so he will add the annotation for the scraping of Prometheus, and he will remove himself from the pending list. And so like this, the controller will detect that the deployment object is now initialized because the list was empty, and he can do what he wants to do with this deployment, so he will create pods associated to this deployment. If you have several initializers, they will try to do the same thing in parallel, so at the end they will succeed to finalize and to remove all the pending initializer, and it will work as it is. So we saw two ways to interact with resources at creation time. And now, if you like the way that is done thanks to resources inside Kubernetes cluster, you may think about creating your own resources. An example of defining your resources is you want to represent a database configuration. You can do in a config map, but in the config map is quite generic, and with a custom resource definition, you can have a dedicated object for your databases. Most of the time, people use it to represent new resources. So a configuration of Prometheus, for example, with the Prometheus operator. But it's really that it's really to create a resource like the core resource of Kubernetes is creating. So you can do the same flows as the other. You can rely on activity on these resources thanks to the API server. So this is a representation of the API server Kubernetes. So historically, we have only the API part. The metrics part is to retrieve some Prometheus metrics from the API server, and the else is where you have the probe, the readiness, and the liveness probe of Kubernetes. So behind API, we have what we call, I say, the core object, so pods, services, nodes. And release after release, the Kubernetes developer implements several kind of workload, and so they created what we call API groups, like batch, where you can find jobs and cron job, and each resources have a version. So for the same object, like jobs, you can have v2 alpha 1, and then when it's the interface is quite stable for the resources, you can go to v1. And like this, now you have several APIs behind APIs endpoint. The URI, when you use the REST endpoint, look like this: APIs, batch, the version, and the resource name. So it's well structured. And now, when you want to create your custom resource, what you are adding, it's a new API group, and you define your object behind a version. You can define several objects, so behind several versions, it's fine like this. And as you can imagine, when you want to create a new resource inside Kubernetes, what you are doing, you create a resource. So the resource here, it's a custom resource definition. You define the group, so the API group here. You define the version. You can say if you want that this resources is namespaced or not. And then you need to provide some grammar, the plural, singular of your object. It can depend, it's not always just put a S if we want. And then you define the kinds, the short name. So for instance, services, you can do kubectl get services, or kubectl get SVC. You will retrieve all the services in the same way. And then you can use the kubectl command with the name of the object that you define here, and you will be able to list all the resources that correspond to this kind that you define here. These resources are stored like any other resources inside the etcd cluster behind the API server. So the advantage of custom resource definition is that it's easy to create. You have a simple resource definition for that. You don't need to manage your storage for that. It's behind the API server in the same etcd cluster. We have some limitation for this with this solution. No resource validation in the API server, but this is not true anymore since 1.9. Now you can put some validation inside the definition. It's quite verbose, but it's possible to do. It's based on regex. You don't have resource defaulting that like you have in the API server for pods. In a pod template, if you don't put all the parameters, they will be defaulted by the API server before going to the etcd cluster. And then you don't have sub-resource on CRD. Like for deployment, you have the scale command where you can say how many pods that you want for this deployment. This is what we call sub-resource. But again, it's not true anymore since the version 1.10. You have no status and scale available for CRD. So you can, for example, create a Couchbase database with representing by a CRD with a scale command, where you can say how many Couchbase nodes that you want thanks to the scale command now. So custom resource definition is a way one way to create your resources like it is done in Kubernetes. But you have another way to do it, is to create your own API server. People wanted to do it since a long time in Kubernetes. So the Kubernetes developer refactor a lot the code of Kubernetes to be able to export from the main repo Kubernetes/Kubernetes in GitHub in several other repositories. So you have the API machinery, you have the API, you have the Go client, and also the API server. And with this part of code from the initial Kubernetes, you can now create your API server like it is done in the master nodes of Kubernetes. So like this, you can have all the features that is available for the standard object from Kubernetes. So your custom API server will rely on another storage than the official API server. You can use etcd, but if you want to implement another interface and use another storage, it's possible to do. And to limit the impact of the user, what Kubernetes has added in the master, it's what we call the API aggregator. And the API aggregator, depending on the resources and the API group, will reroute on the correct API server. So like this is completely transparent for the user. And if we come back a slide representing the API server resources, having a custom API server is having an API group outside the standard API server. Thanks to this way, you can imagine that in a future version of Kubernetes, if we want or we need to improve the scalability of Kubernetes for each API groups, we will have a dedicated etcd cluster with a dedicated API server. Like this, we will be able to manage more requests in parallel on an etcd cluster and have more resources inside your Kubernetes cluster. So if we compare custom API server and custom resource definition, the advantage of the custom API server is you have the validation, the defaulting of resources, like for the core resources. You have an operation workload isolation, like I say. If you add lot of query on the API server, the custom API server, you will not impact the performance of your Kubernetes cluster because he have his own storage and in his own API server. The disadvantage is that you have more components to maintain. You have the API aggregator, you have your own API server, and your storage, like the etcd cluster, to operate. And you need to implement the storage layer where you put the information. Now, compared to custom resource definition, the limitation start to be very limited. The only one is the defaulting that is not available. But I don't know if someone are thinking about this. We saw initializer, so maybe we can implement the defaulting inside initializer for your own resources. So this is something that should be investigated and can be done like this. So people who are thinking now about having, when you start your Kubernetes cluster, an empty API server and only rely on custom resource definition. Like this, you can choose exactly which resources is available on your Kubernetes cluster. It's not like this for the moment, but it's something that people are thinking in the community. So thanks to custom resource definition or custom service server, API server, you are able to create your resources. And after, if you don't do nothing with your resources, it's useless. So when you want to react on resources in Kubernetes, you create what we call controller. So you have the standard controller inside the master that is handling all the standard resources like deployment, pods, services, and so. But for your other resources, you can create custom controller. Some example of controller that is existing is, for example, an endpoint watcher. that is looking at all the endpoints that is created inside your Kubernetes cluster to configure automatically the load balancer in front of your Kubernetes node, for example. You can also imagine a config watcher that is watching a database configuration and configure automatically the file used inside your pods to connect to the databases. In Amadeus, we implemented several controllers. One is open source, is a workflow controller, and in fact is a controller with a CRD that define a graph and the interaction between jobs. And like this, in fact, it's a DAG, it's a dependency graph, where a job can depend on another job before running, and so it orchestrates properly the different jobs inside your cluster. After you have like we call operator, it's an extended controller. So it's a controller. It reacts on objects and resources inside the Kubernetes cluster, but on top of that, it has some operational knowledge on one technology. So for example, the Prometheus operator is here to ease the configuration of Prometheus inside Kubernetes. So you will not write yourself the Prometheus configuration file, but you will define on which services you want Prometheus to scrap your metric, and it will configure and merge automatically all this representation of configuration in one file and update the Prometheus process configuration in order to have it working properly. Rock.io is an operator to operate a safe cluster inside Kubernetes. So to have your own storage running as application in Kubernetes. In Amadeus, also we implemented several operators. The Redis operator is a way to operate Redis inside Kubernetes. So it's the end of this presentation. So we saw 4 different ways to extend Kubernetes thanks to what is provided directly by Kubernetes. The first one is the webhook admission control. It's a way to interact before the creation of object in the API server. So you can authorize or deny the creation of object or activity on an object. Then you have the initializer that is able to decorate the object at creation time. When you want to create your own resource, you can use custom resource definition. And then if you want to have a strong technique to create your resources, you can create your custom API server. It's not the only way to create, to extend Kubernetes. You can also play with the webhook scheduler to interact with the scheduler and to tune a bit how the current scheduler is choosing the node where your workload is running. You can also define some new command on the kubectl command with kube plugins. You can define your own volume with flex volume, and at after each release, you have new feature to extend Kubernetes. So now I think they are thinking about the core concept is here, and now they are implementing a way to extend it, but in a hostile way of the internal code of Kubernetes. So some advice when you want to play with it. So first things, don't mix concern. If you see for a 3-step to validate your resources, it's better to create 4 different webhooks to do it. Like this, if you have a bug in one, you don't need to remove all of them, just deactivate one. And also you need to be reliable and to have a very good response time to limit the performances impact of adding webhook. It's the same for initializer, so it's asynchronous, so you don't have the same issue of performances, but it's better to have several initializers instead of only one that is doing everything. And the second advice is start small. Don't try to create directly a custom API server. So you have a lot of script to do it to help you, but it's still a lot of work to create the defaulting and so. So start, play with custom resource definition. You can do already a lot of things with it. So thanks, and if you have question, I think we still have time for that. I will give you the mic like this. They will be able to.
With the admission controller, if the webhook is simply not answering, is the cluster partially blocked, or are there some protection mechanism?
You have a timeout, so it will be refused by default. If it didn't answer,
so it will only slow down for this specific resource,
exactly.
the action and the APs.
Yeah, that's why you should not put any resources, any action on it. So everything you can do it, but you is why everyone should not do admission control. Is really you know that you are impacting the performances of your cluster when you do it. So when you do extension, you need to be sure of what you are doing and to have a reliable webhook to do it.
Thank you.
Hello, my question is regarding initializers. If they work concurrently, is there some kind of merge operation on the resource? So is it handled automatically?
It's like in any controller in Kubernetes, only one controller can update the object at the same time. So when the second one will try to update they will say that a new version is available in the API server. So it's inside your initializer that you need to implement a retrieve of the new version to retry the update of the new version. So you are doing again the action of trying to add the information.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my question concerns webhooks and security applied to these kind of things. Basically, in your example, I saw that, for instance, protection was related to kind of resources as pods.
Mm-hmm.
But if I try to deploy a pod, specifying it in another way, like, for instance, deployment,
yes,
will it be scanned or not? Basically,
so if you add a deployment at match level, like I done for pods, you can do the same thing. Since you can retrieve the resources and go to the pod template inside the deployment, you can check that the container image in the pod template is okay or not and refuse the creation of the deployment.
Okay, so basically the webhook is supposed to go down all the layers of a deployment to check each component.
Yeah, no, because in deployment you already have the pod template.
Yeah, sure.
So you don't. The pod is not already created. It's if you refuse the deployment creation where you already have the pod template, where you can check the version of the container image, you don't need to wait that the pod is created to have this information.
Okay, thanks.
Just.
In fact, it depends on the type of pod that you want to control. If you want to control only the pod that comes from deployment, you can play with deployment resource. But you can have other controller in the system that create pods on behalf of any CRD, for example. And if you want to control this pod also, you will have to do like in the example and do a webhook on the pod type. So any pod, whatever the pipeline of creation, will be checked.
Okay, just a use case. I want, for instance, I do not want to allow any pod to access to be launched in privileged mode first, and I want to avoid mounting / of the node that hosts the pod. So somehow I guess that by this webhook I block this kind of pods that are mounting / or that are launched in privileged mode, but somehow in defining either a stateful set or a deployment in which pod is not explicitly defined, I mount in this kind of resource, or at least I try to mount in this kind of meta resource slash all to launch to something in privileged mode. Will it be blocked by the webhook?
I think that if you do it at pod level, yes. That means that your meta resource, the deployment or whatever, will be created, but won't give birth to any pod that won't respect the webhook.
Okay. Okay, fine, thank you.
Because when the deployment controller is creating pods, when he creates the pod, he goes through the API server to create the pod also. So you will go through. But I think it will be an issue because he will try to create pods, and again, and he will be refused. But I think it's a...
In which order webhooks compare to initializer? Which one is first?
So initializer is before, because you need to have the resource store inside the etcd cluster that before that the initializer can go on it.
What happens when you have you tweak, for instance, the scheduling of the pods, and you have a conflicting implementation? For instance, you use, let's say, Portworx for storage. So Portworx tweaks the scheduler of Kubernetes, and you have your own scheduling algorithms that you want to put on top. So finally, who takes the decision? Which component takes the decision to schedule something?
So when you want to use your own scheduler, you put in a notation inside your object to say, I want to use this scheduler and not official scheduler. So here you cannot have two schedulers. With the webhook, I didn't play a lot with it, but I think it's an additional information that is taken into account inside the official scheduler, but it's just to give a better score to the nodes or not. So at the end, the answer is done at the official scheduler.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Regarding custom resource definition, CID, I guess. Yeah. If I define this CID as being not namespaceable, will I be able to play with the namespaces? Allocating resources that are defined in this CID. Will I be able to put into different namespaces the resources that I defined with this CID? No?
I didn't get it. Can you...
let's say that...
There are some resources that are not namespace in, like nodes, for example. Okay, so in the metadata of the resource, you don't have namespace, and you cannot assign it to a namespace. It's a cluster resource. So this is what the non-namespace mean.
Oh, okay. I was imagining that somehow I will be able to define a specific CID for a kind of very specific kind of pod that I have to reiterate hundreds of times across my cluster.
Sorry, I didn't follow you here.
Yeah, I was just imagining that instead of defining a very particular kind of pod, I would just, several times of course, I may just define once a CID representing this pod with several containers embedded, and I will be able to play with the whole thing just through CIDs. But maybe it's not a good use case. Huh?
Yeah, this is so you can use a pod template inside your CRDs that you want, but I don't follow the things with namespaces here. It's namespaces. It means that you can create the scope of your resources. When you will create it, it will be only available in one namespace. This is the option that you have behind this selection. Like if I create my CRDs inside the default namespace, I will be able to see it only if I'm in this namespace. And that's the notion of namespace. Cluster level, it means that these resources is not attached to a namespace, so anyone that has the permission to see cluster object like nodes can see the object by default.
Yeah. Okay, I get it.
And so you can have only one instance of this object in all the cluster when it's the namespace. So I don't know if you have some question in the WebEx, just one or two questions.
No? Okay, no question on the WebEx. So
Let's go to the second presentation.
thank you for the first one.
Thank you, Cedric.